Jailbreak, a daring escape. The prisoner. The cold iron bars stood between Jake Holloway and freedom. The dim light flickered in his tiny cell, casting long shadows that stretched across the damp concrete floor. He had been locked away for a crime he didn't commit, framed by a corrupt system that thrived on power and deception. For 3 years, Jake had endured the suffocating walls of Ravenwood Penitentiary, a maximum security prison notorious for its brutal guards and inescapable structure. Every night he replayed the events that led to his imprisonment, the betrayal by someone he once trusted. But tonight was different. Tonight, he wasn't going to sit in the darkness and wait for justice. Tonight, he was going to escape. Chapter 2. The Plan. Jake had spent months studying every corner of the prison. The shifts of the guards, the blind spots of the security cameras, the weaknesses in the structure. He had mapped it all out in his head. His cellmate, an old-timer named Red, had been the key to his plan. Red had spent nearly 20 years behind bars, and in that time, he had learned the ins and outs of the prison better than anyone. With his help, Jake had devised an escape plan so meticulous that failure wasn't an option. "We go through the maintenance tunnels," Red whispered one night. "They run beneath the prison and lead out past the perimeter wall. But there's one problem. Only one way in, and it's through the restricted area." Jake knew what that meant: guards, motion detectors, and locked doors. But he had already figured out a way to get through. Chapter 3. The First Move. The night of the escape, Jake sat on his bunk, waiting. At exactly 2 a.m., the power in the prison flickered. It was just a few seconds, but it was enough. Red had bribed an inside man to cause a temporary power surge. In those few moments of darkness, Jake slipped a thin metal wire from his mattress. He had spent months sharpening it against the concrete. He picked the lock on his cell door, keeping his movements precise. Within seconds, the lock clicked open. He turned to Red, who gave him a nod. The old man knew this was a one-way trip. Stepping into the hallway, they moved like shadows, careful not to make a sound. The guards were at their posts, but the brief power outage had given them just enough distraction. Chapter 4. The Restricted Zone. Reaching the restricted area was the easy part. Getting inside was another challenge altogether. The door was locked, reinforced with an electronic security panel. Jake pulled out a small device he had built using smuggled parts, a crude but effective signal jammer. He attached it to the panel, and within moments, the lock disengaged. The door creaked as they pushed it open, stepping into the dark corridor beyond. This was where things got dangerous. Security cameras lined the walls, and motion sensors covered the floors. They had only seconds to move before someone noticed. Jake took a deep breath and sprinted, following the path he had memorized. Red followed, moving surprisingly fast for a man his age. They reached the entrance to the maintenance tunnels just as an alarm started to blare. Chapter 5. The Descent. Jake pried open the floor grate, revealing the narrow tunnel below. The stench of sewage and rust filled the air, but neither man hesitated. They climbed down just as the sound of rushing boots echoed through the hallway above. The tunnels were dark, damp, and filled with dangers of their own. Rats scurried past, and the floor was slick with years of grime. The map Red had drawn in his mind led them forward, each step bringing them closer to freedom. But as they turned a corner, a sudden roar of rushing water filled their ears. A security measure, an automated floodgate designed to prevent escape. They had seconds before the tunnel would be submerged. Chapter 6. The Flood. Jake grabbed Red's arm and pulled him forward, their feet splashing through ankle-deep water that was rising fast. The exit was just ahead, a heavy steel grate barring their way. With no time to think, Jake pulled a screwdriver from his pocket and began loosening the bolts. The water rose to their knees, then their waists. Red helped, his fingers working frantically against the rusted metal. With a final, desperate pull, the grate came loose, and they squeezed through just as the tunnel filled behind them. Gasping for air, they emerged into a moonlit drainage ditch outside the prison walls. Chapter 7. The Chase. Freedom was within reach, but the alarms were blaring and searchlights were sweeping the grounds. Jake and Red ran, their bodies aching from the cold and exhaustion. The sound of barking dogs echoed through the night. The guards weren't far behind. They reached the tree line, disappearing into the dense forest beyond. But the chase wasn't over. Helicopters thundered overhead, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. "We have to split up," Red said, his voice ragged.